Welcome to Slash Forward. In this episode, we're going to work on picking up this narrative as we examine how to beat the various Jigsaw traps from Saw 5. Consider hitting that like button to show your appreciation for impossible flashbacks. To start, I'll unpack the storyline to see what we can learn. Let's get to it. We open on a rainy rooftop and zoom into this building to find a man shackled to a table. He wakes up both concerned and confused. When the screen turns on, we learn that this is Seth, being taught about the hopelessness he has bestowed upon others. He got a short sentence on a murder charge due to a technicality, and now it's time to explore undiscovered aspects about crime and punishment. There is a pendulum above him, and in order to stop it, he has to push levers in two nearby devices that will then crush his hands. He mulls it over and gives in, allowing the machinery to take his hands. But the pendulum don't stop. It descends relentlessly, slowly flicking away at his abdomen, tossing aside portions of his intestines like poop-filled blood sausages. But he looks over and takes comfort to know that, in his final moments, he's managed to bring someone else great pleasure. We then circle back around to the ending of the last film. Strom studies the bloody scene before getting locked in with lights out. He has no signal, so it's up to him to find his way. Luckily, there's a secret door, easily found, and a tape player. He's warned not to proceed, but he never backs down when presented with a riddle. Shortly thereafter, a wild boar jumps out to get him. He wakes up sometime later with his head inside a snuff box. The game here is that you drown. Any point system you attempt to apply here is completely negated. Naturally abhorring a life without precious oxygen, he scrambles and manages to find a ballpoint pen that he uses to pull off a perfect blind tracheotomy. Outside, Corbett is carried to safety by Hoffman as backup finally arrives. He does his best to muster up an appropriate level of sadness to deliver the terrible news.
Nobody made it.
But Strom's survival pops a squat all over that sentiment. We then meet up with Jill, taking care of some of the formalities after John's death. She's entitled to his leavings, which comes in the form of a VHS tape. On it, John's final vlog, in which he apologizes for being a bit of a turd and confides he left her in trust of the contents of a very important box. Mr. Feldman whips it out and Jill uses her lover's key to pop the top, closing it after the briefest of peeks. Meanwhile, everyone's finding closure.
The Jigsaw murders are over.
For sure. And there are commendations and promotions all around. For Hoffman, the only one from his unit that's still alive. He takes a moment to give a quick speech about cherishing life and appreciating justice. Then he retires to his office, where he finds a rather cryptic message. He immediately rushes off to root through Strom's personals in the evidence locker, and then is summoned to the hospital about Agent Perez. From the condition of her pillow, we presume the news is not good. Strom reveals that Perez said Hoffman's name before she died, and he also wonders aloud how the man standing before him now came out of this crazy ordeal looking so damn pretty. Strom's commander then arrives to inform him that, despite the desire to get another crack at Jill Tuck, he's officially off the case, thanks to his sloppy procedure around entering that warehouse on his own. We then find Hoffman in a seedy basement with red velour blankets, letting us know this is far from over. He does, in fact, have a lot more scheming to do, and no time to waste as his subjects are already in place and nearly awake. Sure enough, they come to and try not to geek out about it, but they know they're in a jigsaw trap. This is our first savvy group of victims, providing each other advice and understanding the need to seek out and avoid tripwires. Billy then appears to admonish them for leading such selfish lives. They'll have to fight their natural instincts in order to make it safely through these traps. Each room has a global 15-minute timer set to some nail bombs to ensure they don't linger in any one room too long before or after a game. In this first one, they have 60 seconds to retrieve their key before the cable winds them back into their decapitation cubby. But to succeed, they have to work together. Malik starts tripping the game timer, but Charles jerks him off and instead scores the first key for himself. Luba gets the second, then Britt and Malik get it done as well. Poor Ashley struggles with the task and never even gets her bat off the shoulder, leaving her to be the sole victim. When they finish, the door opens. Easy peasy. Britt then goes ahead and gathers all the keys just in case they come in handy later. We then transition over to Hoffman, trying to reach Strom. When he's unavailable, he leaves a message with his supervisor Erickson requesting a callback. We find out that Strom is unavailable because he's busy performing a covert op, the first rule of which is cell phones off. He pulls some records and makes a connection between Hoffman's sister and her killer's subsequent entrapment in a jigsaw puzzle. On his way out, he gets spotted by the boss and plays it off like he's just wrapping some stuff up before his much-needed vacation, when in reality, he's taking a city tour of various jigsaw victim locations. As he delves into the mind of a killer, we transition to Hoffman on scene, relishing in the thrill of being called back to investigate his own victim. Also,
I'd say justice was served.
he finds affirmation.
I got you.
Nothing we just witnessed was previously a secret. Back at the funhouse, the crew is heeding my advice, taking things slow and declining to close doors so they can gather as much information as possible beforehand. Of course, Malik is a constant hindrance to lucid thought. They do figure that several of them are related through connections to a large, shady real estate transaction, which Charles is aware of as an investigative journalist. Unfortunately, they're forced to close the door to avoid the prior bomb, which requires them to focus in on the task at hand. There are 4 chambers that will protect them from the firebombs in the room, but only 3 keys to be found. Malik steps up, but Charles makes a practical calculation and takes his whacking stick to him before breaking all the jars. However, since turnabout is universally deemed fair play, Luba crams Charles's head and the other 3 duck away as the bombs pop. When the temperature drops, the others step out to observe the floor smear that once was Charles. We then circle back to Strom, taking another trip into the office where he learns that after Seth's pendulum death, Hoffman was involved in every subsequent Jigsaw investigation. We then flash back to see that his cryptic message had itself been a flashback, which led up to his first encounter with John Kramer. John had some qualms about having his name attached to work that wasn't his. He also doesn't approve of his vapid methodology, which lacks nuance and a learning plan, but he offers the option of them working together. John can help put a little polish on his new hobby, and Hoffman can help him clean up the streets.
If a subject survives my method, he or she is instantly rehabilitated.
Hasn't happened yet. Since John has an evidence package ready to ship if anything happens to him, Hoffman doesn't have much of an option. But also, since we know Hoffman's a watcher, this likely appeals strongly to his latent perversions. As Strom heads out, Erickson gets around to returning Hoffman's prior phone call. He was just checking in to see if Strom had any luck with his theory about an additional Jigsaw accomplice from on the inside, planting some seeds in Erickson's mind. Strom continues his tour of the local crime scenes, which are apparently still mostly intact. He flashes back again to details he couldn't possibly know, and that also don't help his investigation. This reveals that Hoffman was involved in helping to keep tap on Gordon's tail, and that their preparations involve anticipation and chance, dependent on a deep intuition of human behavior. Back at the third room, they talk a bit more, but Malik's not too concerned with the why, he just wants to get on with the how. So they close the door and get started. There are 5 circuits in this room. They need to be closed via the bathwater in order to undo the 5 locks on the door. Luba openly expresses her idea to use Malik as the conduit, which makes her untrustworthy, which manifests in Britt casually killing her. With the dirty part done, there's little hesitation in getting her hooked up and ski-frickin' daddling into the next room. Meanwhile, back at FBI headquarters, Jill Tuck has come to confront Supervisor Erickson about being followed by Agent Strom, setting some alarms to buzzing in his head. At that moment, Strom has reached his most familiar crime scene. Here's where John set into motion the events from this movie, entrusting Hoffman alone, expecting Amanda to fail. Strom then becomes bafflingly enraged by the sudden epiphany they were all supposed to die.
You were supposed to be the hero.
Yeah, where have you been? As the machinations unfold, we see Hoffman pull a classic crank yanker on Erickson with Strom's phone. This causes him to become suspicious and order a trace, but Hoffman's turned it off until he gets back to the lab where he turns it back on. This is happening right as our duo arrives at the last room. This trap appears to require them to stick their arms into a box and feed it their blood in order to open the door. Malik first suggests Britt try out her key collection just to make sure, and he recognizes there are 5 holes right as she recognizes all 5 keys from the first room are the same. The revelation here is that each game was meant to be easier through teamwork and allow 5 survivors.
Your lifelong instincts will tell you to do one thing, but I implore you to do the opposite.
Right, how did you not get that? With the bomb timer now running out, they're forced to close the door. Now they're stuck trying to figure out how to give an uncomfortable volume of blood for just 2 people. Elsewhere, Hoffman exits the precinct and gets himself tailed by Strom. This is right as Strom's colleague gets a lock on his phone and alerts Erickson to its location. Strom follows Hoffman to a residence and enters, gun drawn, pursuing him into a basement. Back in the room and facing death, Malik confesses he burned down a building for an ounce of smack, and Britt puts together that they all took some part in accepting bribes to destroy, steal, and redevelop a property. The conspiracy and cover-up allowed them all to walk away scot-free, despite the fact that their actions resulted in the deaths of 8 individuals. Recognizing they deserve to be here, they both strap up for the grand bloodletting. I can barely think of a more unnerving way to give blood, but they get her going regardless and plunge unnecessarily deep. I mean, mean, how are you going to stop that? Yeah, they get the door open, but at what cost? Meanwhile, Erickson has arrived on location and goes in solo, which he previously punished Strom for doing. I just thought I'd mention that. But it works out because he gets in there just in time to share in the celebration of the survivor's success. After ordering an ambulance, he calls Strom's phone, which goes off right next to him. This pretty much seals the deal for him, and he puts out an APB for his boy, which at this point may be a wasted effort, as Strom eventually reaches the end of the road and finds a trap and a tape. He's commended for his performance and informed his only chance to survive the room is to get into the box. But he hears Hoffman coming and doubles back. Fisticuffs ensue, resulting in Strom closing Hoffman into the box. However, we learn this to be a demonstration of his mastery of human behavior, as the trap revolves around Strom's inability to trust others and is revealed to be the negative space in the room. The box is actually safety. Hoffman is slowly lowered into the floor as the room closes in, trash compactor style, giving Hoffman a satisfying crimson shower on his way out. I can see the flower of this ongoing storyline blooming, but I have to assume at least one of the final films in the series is a standalone. I guess we'll have to keep watching to find out. As a side note, I'll be examining these traps as presented in the film. It was blatantly obvious that these traps were supposed to be solved as a group, so much so that I assumed it was just the characters' terrible nature overriding their thinking that caused them to behave the way they did. It did not occur to me until the ending that they actually didn't realize they were supposed to work together. Regardless, if they had done so, each of the traps is almost trivially easy, and since these solutions were counted off in the movie itself, it doesn't make a lot of sense to approach it that way here. But before we get to the death house, we have to go back and take a look at Seth's pendulum. We'll have to ignore for a moment that this is a revenge trap, designed to result in a slow and painful death with his full understanding of why he's being punished. This is certainly satisfying, but I'm trying to help you, and I know you didn't murder anyone and get off on a technicality. Although being a death trap, we have some pretty extreme limitations. The 60-second timer is severely tight, and Seth is fairly well locked down to the table. He also went through with the challenge, but was denied his victory. Not being able to take the word of the psychotic mastermind of your demise on good faith is a significant hindrance. So assuming we're not going to crush our hands, it should be noted that you wouldn't be able to see the collar holding you down. But it is the only solid restraint that prevents you from moving more than a little bit. At the end, we see that it was released through some sort of gear mechanism and just sort of opens up with no latches or other sorts of locks or disconnects. This would be the sole focus of your efforts. The one advantage here is that the arm restraints are very forgiving and the straps are way too high on the forearm. They allow a significant amount of travel so that you can mostly freely move your arms. If you couldn't just reach the neck restraint and attempt to force it open, you could definitely reach your forearms and unstrap them to achieve full range of motion. From that point, it's mostly a matter of working on that neck collar, which would mostly come down to engineering tolerances. How tight are these pieces and what kind of fail-safes are involved? I know it's supposed to seem substantial, but the way it opens implies it's a couple of mechanical arms attached to an intricate gear-driven mechanism, which sounds like a delicate and intricate device. It appears to be attached to a hinge on the table rather than being a more substantial bar system that locks under the table or is a full ring. It's something simple and sturdy. With hands free, I believe you'd be able to pull this thing open or use leverage to wrench it free of the table. Once you sat up, you'd have more time to address your ankles, except Hoffman would be there ready to try to come in and kill you. But there also seemed to be a ton of random detritus lying around, so from here, I would wish you luck. Next up is the snuff box. Again, this is a trap by definition, a puzzle by association only. The intent here is to kill. Also, Strom successfully escaped the trap, so his method is one obvious option. Assuming most people wouldn't want to utilize such a high-risk strategy as it would likely fail, there seems to be a couple more possibilities to try out. First, close-ups of the box reveal the bottom is rubber-lined to keep it watertight. However, the underside of the box reveals that it's actually just straight rubber. Now, he probably declined to try to pull his head downward through it because that would simulate the sensation of being born feet first, a condition we are genetically predisposed to resist. I would encourage at least giving this a go to see if you can. But if not, perhaps he could use the pen to puncture the lining rather than his throat. Of course, if the hole in the lining isn't bigger than the tubes, it's not going to drain faster than it fills. But he could repeatedly stab at it and stretch it out, which would create some opportunities. Also, there's a limited quantity of water, so if you could hold your breath long enough, you may be able to power through despite the unequal drain to fill ratio. Another option would be to remove your belt to use the buckle on the glass. It would be hard to get much force built up, but it seems like you have a 50-50 chance here. The glass in the first room was old and brittle, but the glass in the box at the end was bulletproof. So depending on which glass you got here, you may be able to escape easily, or you may be left with the only option being to cut your head off to get out. On to the rooms now. Just as a precursor, every room had a 15-minute global timer. They could wait to start their game or hang out after, but only up to 15 minutes. At that point, the nail bombs would go off, severely injuring them. It could be possible, however, to negate this factor. It was noted that the bombs appear to be powered by a C4 charge, which is highly stable. They could possibly just remove the detonators to deactivate them. Assuming there may be a trap or failsafe to prevent this, they could also possibly destroy the jars and remove the nails to limit the destructive powers of the bombs. This could be risky, however, and I'm not sure it would gain them much, as the actual time it took them to figure out their connection to each other was unnecessary. It didn't help them solve anything, and the puzzles themselves were fairly straightforward. Just to reset the scene on the first one, as soon as they move toward the boxes, they'll pull a pin that starts a 60-second timer. Only one person can proceed all the way to the end at once, as moving forward pulls the others back. It wasn't known at the time, but all of their keys were the same. They actually only needed one key. Without knowing this, there's still an easy answer to it involving simple teamwork. Send out the second and fourth person to retrieve multiple keys and bring them back for everyone. There's honestly no reason to go further than that. If the game relies on unlocking your neck shackles and you can easily acquire the keys, why complicate matters? Next up is the hole room. Again, not sure what was confusing about this. There are 4 tunnels, but 3 keys, but nothing that says you can't cram more than one person into a hole. Why wouldn't your first instinct be to do that? Also, these locks seem highly pickable, as a typical locking cylinder has a series of springs and tumblers that are engaged by the pattern of the key. He removed this by requiring them to cram simple shapes into the front to turn them. This means no tumblers or cylinders at all. These locks could be opened by any sufficient amount of rotational force, but acquiring all the keys is not a problem, so that's basically irrelevant. The real problem here is human nature. Old Charles thought he was so smart and pragmatic, but it blew up right in his face. This speaks to the human factor. I said in part 2 you would want to take out bad actors like Xavier, but this also demonstrates some of the potential pitfalls of this strategy. Once you open up the possibility of advancing through deceit and physical harm, you degrade trust among the group and put yourself at risk of being eliminated. After that is the tub room. This one gets harder as you get fewer people. The intent here was for all 5 folks to hold one of the circuits and step into the bathtub, so they can share the load and safely unlock the door. This one seems to be mostly based on fairy tale, however. While tolerances can vary based on a variety of factors, the human body can typically only withstand approximately 10 milliamps of current. 2 things should be noted here. One is the survival, but the other is the effect of electricity on the body. Some of you may have used a TENS unit before, with the electrodes and the calming current it runs through your muscles. If it was set high enough, you would get the strange sensation that comes from an external device triggering muscle contraction. Put it on your forearms and it makes you contort your hands completely independent of your own intentions. 10 plus milliamps will induce a spasm with enough strength that you would be unable to release whatever you're holding. I'm not sure about spreading this load among multiple humans because I don't know that much about electricity, but I don't have to. They show the meter hitting 100 milliamps. So even if you could share the load, that's 20 per person. No one is getting out of that bathtub. This also means that accomplishing the task as intended with 3 people is impossible. Their only option would be to find an alternate way to close those circuits. If they had brought their whacking sticks from the prior 2 rooms with them, that might have bridged the gap. Another alternative would be to splash around in the water real good and make sure it's sufficiently salty, because salt water is what's conductive and we constantly have salt on our skin from sweat, and then try to carefully spread an appropriate quantity of it on the floor to make a connection between the various implements. But not too much, because they're going to need that water for the blade box. Again, this trap was made more difficult by 2 factors. First, the fact there was only 2 of them, but then also by the fact that they didn't bring tools with them. Britt started collecting objects from the first trap. Where was that thoughtfulness throughout? They had sticks in more than one room. Why did they ever leave them behind? Malik rightfully pointed out that they could use the water from the tub in the prior room to try to fill the jar. The complication is that there's a lever inside each hole that has to be pushed up in order to gain access to the tubes that fill the jar. This requires them to keep their arm inside the device as they complete the challenge. With all the various global and trap-specific timers, and the need to disconnect the conduits in the prior room, it makes this one a bit tighter, but perfectly doable. As a first step, if they kept their poles, they could have inserted those into the hole in order to keep it open as they put in the water. Utilize the center holes as they would have the shortest tubes. Then use your shoes or whatever you can to transport the water quickly and fill the jar. It requires 10 quarts of fluid, so it would definitely require more than one trip. However, the game timer doesn't start until they close the door, and these are all mechanical devices. It's not clear there would be a problem with filling the jar first, then closing the door. The game would turn on, register a full jar, and open the exit door. If this ends up not being possible, they do have a body in the prior room that was killed in a way that left her essentially full of blood. So welcome to a full jar. Finally, the box full of crystal meth. As I've always said, unequivocally, the best way to win is to decline to play the game. That's essentially it for this one. If Strom had left and stayed gone, he would have been all good. It's not dawning on folks yet that they have to resist their natural urges in most cases. But that's really all it took. If he's convinced he's actually doing something in this fight, all Hoffman has to do is take a dive and let him get off a hip toss into the box, and voila, you're pissing blood all over your killer's face, my friends. I'm sure at this point I'm just reiterating to you things that you already know. Saw 5 is a lock. You would handily manage your way through any of these scenarios with poise and confidence. Of that, I'm sure. Before we go, I'd like to give huge thanks to my donors memorialized in the Hall of Headshots. As an FYI, I have a website set up where you can support the channel through donations or merch. Any donation unlocks uncensored movie reviews of Life Force and Under the Skin, with others to be added over time. And if you enjoyed the video, I'd love for you to become part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.